the grace that you guys have extended to us over the last few weeks as we've journeyed through that. So thank you. Right, this morning we'll be continuing our series. We got that up there? Great. The greatest sermon ever. This is a tribute to the greatest sermon ever, which was preached 2,000 years ago by Jesus, the Sermon on the Mount. And if you have got your Bibles and you want to have a look this morning, it's in Matthew 5 through to chapter 7 is the Sermon on the Mount. And so the things that we've been exploring over the last few weeks are around, well, what is it, what isn't it, and who is this message for, and what was Jesus really trying to say with his Sermon on the Mount? So first of all, what is it? It was Jesus' kingdom manifesto. It's not a list of rules of how to get to heaven one day, but it was Jesus saying, now that the kingdom of heaven is here, this is now how we should live. As people who participate in, as people who live in and enjoy the benefits of the kingdom, this is how we should live. And that if we read it sort of flat and literally, we'll sort of get the tip of the iceberg of what Jesus was saying, but there's actually a whole lot more underneath the surface, and that's what we've been doing over the last few weeks, is trying to unpack what's the things that are under the surface. How can we dive a bit deeper and see what Jesus was really getting at here? And ultimately, through the whole thing, he is saying this, that how we treat people is how we treat God. And how we treat people will determine how we live our life. It will determine the choices that we make in life. It will determine the fruit that is the outcome of our life, which will set the foundations for our lives. And so this is the underlying thing that's going through this whole thing. And so the question for us is how do we participate in, how do we live in and receive the benefits of the kingdom of heaven here and now? The kingdom of heaven operates on a set of principles. It's like God has set in place some natural principles on earth, and we know things like gravity and things like that are natural principles that whether we want to ignore them or acknowledge that they exist. You know what I mean? Like if you drop something, it's going to fall. So there's these natural principles. The kingdom of heaven is like that as well. There are principles that are tied up with the kingdom of heaven that are in operation whether we want to acknowledge it or not. And they will operate whether we want to engage with them or not. And so what Jesus is presenting is this choice that we get to live in and participate in the kingdom of heaven, or we get the choice to not participate in. And it gives us this dichotomy, or this that we have the choice to live in it, and there will be fruit from living in the kingdom of heaven, or we can choose to not live in it, and there will be the fruit of that. And he shows us that one will lead to life and one will lead to destruction. And so, and we looked last week at the word sin, and the understanding that the word sin literally means to not partake in or to not share in. And so sin is literally to not partake in the kingdom of heaven. We have this opportunity to share in, receive the benefits of, partake of the kingdom of heaven, are we going to choose to do that or not? All these choices will produce fruit, good or bad. And so, unfortunately, sometimes we can have the perspective of the rich young ruler who had this kind of perspective. His perspective was this: just tell me what I need to do to get to heaven when I die. So he's sort of saying, literally, so that I can just get on living with my life, just tell me the things I need to do so that I can sort of carry on with my life. But Jesus cuts straight to the heart, as he does with the Sermon on the Mount. He gets past the rubbish, past the tip of the iceberg stuff, dives underneath and gets to his heart. And he says, basically, that the kingdom of heaven is only for those who are willing to lose their lives. Only those who will lose their life for my sake will find true life. And so we cannot expect to engage in and live and participate, receive the benefits of the kingdom of heaven whilst hanging on to our own life. We can only engage in the kingdom of heaven when we make that choice to lose our life for his sake. And so there's this challenge there for us. Peter McHugh, who's coming to the conference, said this recently, and it's something I've said each week, but I just wanted to bring it out again. He said, most people have repented enough to be forgiven, but not enough to see the kingdom. And when he talks about repentance, he's talking about the change of our mind, the renewing of our mind, living with a different perspective. And this is literally what Jesus is doing with the Sermon on the Mount. He's saying, now that the kingdom of heaven is here, there's a new way to think, a new way to live, a new way to act. And so who is this kingdom for? Well, he starts out the Sermon on the Mount describing who the kingdom is for. He says it's for the meek, it's for the humble, it's for the spiritual zeros. It's not for the ones that are proud and puffed up. It's for the ones that think less of themselves. It's for the ones that are hungry and thirsty for Him. It's for the merciful. It's not for the proud, not for the self-righteous. He's in another passage, he actually says, you know what, that God actually opposes the proud and He gives grace to the humble. And so the kingdom of heaven is for everyone. That's what Jesus is saying. In a culture and time where God was only for the spiritual ones, or for the ones who were learned and the spiritual heroes, so to speak, Jesus is turning up and saying, no, the kingdom of heaven is for everyone. E. Stanley Jones said this in his book, The Unshakable Kingdom and the Unchanging Person. He said, my greatest fear for the future of the church is not that they would forget about the kingdom, but that they would in fact reduce it. That they would in fact reduce it. And this is calling back to that quote that Peter was saying, that some people have repented enough to be forgiven, because we have this perspective that this is all about how do we get to heaven when we die, rather than how do we get the kingdom of heaven here now. And so E. Stanley Jones is saying, my greatest fear is that we would just reduce the gospel of the kingdom to this idea that it's just about how do we get to heaven. So the question for us is, how do we now participate in the kingdom of heaven now that it's here? So I pulled some stuff from one of Peter's books, Priorities, because I think it gives us a helpful perspective. And while I talk, you're probably all going to read it, eh? But it's a lot of stuff up there. But let me just go through it really quickly. On the left side is what I would call a soterian perspective, or a salvation perspective, or a church perspective, so to speak. And this is probably where, in all honesty, a lot of Christians we think along these lines. And what Jesus is doing is, I believe, is trying to pull us out of this perspective and into a kingdom perspective. So what must I do after I'm saved to continue on to heaven? Well, we think for disciples, it's get to heaven by growing in character and doing what church people do. Go to church regularly, tithe or give, attend a small group, serve in church programs, go to prayer meetings, and pursue spiritual disciplines. They're not bad things. I'm not saying this is bad and this is good. I'm just trying to help us get some perspective. We would see faith as a belief system that primarily affects where someone lives in the afterlife. As servants, we work for the Lord. Our identity is based on what we do or on performance. Our goal is to manage our behavior, and it's focused on my destiny. We become soul-driven, as I once was, by my fear. And we see discipline as a change of behavior in an attempt to be holy. And a focus on below-the-line activities. That's actually a part of his book, Living Above the Line. And then on the other side, what must I believe to see heaven invade earth through me? So this is that other perspective. As disciples, we release heaven on earth by recognizing God's presence in everyday life, pursuing friendship and intimacy with God as a son or daughter. We focus on releasing His reign on earth daily. Our faith perspective is about spirituality and an impartation of the kingdom here and now. We are sons or daughters who work with the Lord. Here, that's a big difference. We're not working for the Lord, but we are, who knows that we are co-crucified, co-resurrected. We are co-heirs, called to co-labor with Him. We're called to co-create with Him. This is a partnership. And so our identity is based on who we are, that we live from a place of acceptance, not performance. We manage our beliefs. The old covenant was behavior management. The new covenant is belief management. So we manage our belief focused on our identity. We're Spirit-led as a mark of sonship. And discipline is a change of attitude to align with being like Jesus. And our focus is on above-the-line activities. So the point is this, is that we move from one side where it's obligation, and we move to the other side where we get to. And this is a massive change. It's a massive change of perspective, of thinking and understanding about why we exist as people on the earth. And so we move from a soterian gospel to a kingdom gospel, and it actually opens this whole thing up. And we realize that we're actually made for so much more. There's more for us as believers. There's more for us as people who participate and live in and enjoy the benefits of the kingdom, because we get to give away as well what we receive. So the point is this: you can live out of obligation, or you can, let's talk about giving as an idea. You can give out of obligation, or you can give out of love, joy, and passion. See, Paul makes it clear which one God prefers, eh? He says, I love a cheerful giver. See, we go from have to get to. And if you want the benefits of the kingdom, you must choose to live in and participate in it. So here's a thought that I shared with our Fire Starters group a couple of weeks ago. But this is the thought: you can only truly receive what you are willing to give away. You can only truly receive what you are willing to give away. That's how it works in the kingdom. Because if we are only trying to get so that we can control and so that we can hold it all for ourselves, that's not the way of the kingdom. The way of the kingdom is, if you're willing to give it away, then I'll give you more. Because He wants the kingdom to flow through us. And we talk about sowing and reaping. The point of sowing and reaping is that we get to participate in a cycle of generosity. So we get more to give away more. Not we get more so that we can have more. This is where the prosperity gospel gets what is a kingdom principle and then makes it about me. No, the kingdom is about Him. And we get to enjoy being a part of that and participating in it. So it's this upside down kingdom. It's the opposite spirit. It's a different way of living. It's the unnatural in this world way of thinking and living. And it's like, I think it's like this. It's like Lightning McQueen. Has anyone ever seen the movie Cars? It's like Lightning McQueen when he gets stuck at Radiator Springs, and there's the Hudson Hornet, this old race car, and he challenges him to a race. And Lightning McQueen has only ever raced on asphalt. And so he knows if I'm going around a corner, if I'm turning left, I need to turn my wheel left. Well, who knows, on a dirt track, if you want to turn left, you've got to turn right. And so he has this race with the Hudson Hornet, and he loses. And so Lightning McQueen is learning that if I want to turn left, I need to turn right, and that's what it's like for us in the kingdom. But so let's watch. I'm not sure if I need to press this to. There we go.
That book actually did a good job. Well, now, where the heck is he? Sheriff, is he making another run for it?
No. He ran out of asphalt in the middle of the night and asked me if he could come down here. All he's trying to do is make that there.
It's a bit jerky, isn't it?
Ah, great. Perfect turns on every track of a race.
Sheriff, why don't you go get yourself a quart of oil that flows? I'll keep an eye on him.
Well, thanks, Doc. I've been feeling a quart low.
This ain't asphalt, son. This is dirt.
Oh, great. What do you want? You here to gloat?
You don't have three-wheel brakes, so you gotta pitch it hard. Get loose and just drive it with the throttle. Give it too much, be out of the dirt and into the tulips.
So you're a judge, a doctor, and a racing expert.
I'll put it simple. If you're going hard enough left, you'll find yourself turning right.
Oh, right. That makes perfect sense. Turn right to go left. Yes! Thank you! Or should I say no thank you? It's an opposite world. Maybe that really means thank you. Crazy grandpa car. What an idiot. Turn right to go left. Oh.
All right. Sorry, it was a bit like having dial-up. Hey, remember dial-up? It was a bit jerky. Not sure what was happening there. But Lightning McQueen, he learns this lesson, and if you watch further through the movie, he finally figures out how to turn right to go left. But I love that saying that he says. He's like, oh, in opposite world, to turn right, yeah, whatever. But actually, sometimes we can have that perspective with the kingdom. We might read Jesus teaching about the kingdom, and it's like opposite world. Well, what do you mean? Like, forgive people that hurt me? That's opposite world. Give to receive? That's opposite world. I'm struggling financially, so give? That's opposite world. Do you know what I mean? But this is where the rubber meets the road, so to speak, excuse the pun, on whether you really trust Jesus. It's opposite. It's learning to live in opposite world. That is literally what it is about. And so I love that thought. It's opposite world. And so the point is this: we've been translated out of the kingdom of darkness and into his glorious light. And Paul says that we are now citizens of another kingdom. Following Jesus isn't just believing the right things to hopefully get to the right place. No, faith in Jesus is actually allegiance to him as king. It's and to live as citizens of his kingdom. See, we have been welcomed into opposite world. We've been taken out of the kingdom of darkness, welcome to opposite world, where if you want to go left, turn right. Do you know what I mean? And he says, hey, follow the narrow way. Everything's opposite that way. He says, turn the other cheek. What? He says, hey, we don't use and manipulate people. We treat people as they deserve. Sorry, no, we don't treat people as they deserve, but we treat them as they're worth. We carry an opposite spirit. And so this kingdom operates not on striving and effort, but in surrender and trust. It's no longer I that lives, but Christ in me. And so the kingdom is not found in us trying hard to behave right. It's not that stuff on the left-hand side. No, the kingdom operates in our surrender to his will, to the Father's will, and our willingness to trust and obey what Jesus says. Now, I'm going to offer dignity to this person, even though that they've hurt me. And it would be really, really good. It would feel really good if I could just tell everyone about what they've done to me. But no, actually, I'm going to treat them with dignity and honesty. That's opposite world. So let's, in Matthew 6, I just want to pick up on something really quick, and then we're going to jump into a passage that I just want to concentrate on. But here's the thought. Don't use and manipulate others to get affirmation for yourselves. This behavior actually unmasks what you truly believe. So in Matthew 6, Jesus talks about giving to the needy. And so this is part of the Sermon on the Mount. He says, be careful not to practice your righteousness in front of others, to be seen by them. If you do, you will have no reward from your Father in heaven. So when you give to the needy, do not announce it with trumpets, as the hypocrites do in the synagogues and on the streets, to be honored by others. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you give to the needy, do not let your left hand know what your right hand is doing. It seems like an odd sort of statement. So that your giving may be in secret, then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So back in those days, you would bring your gifts to the temple. And so if you wanted to give to the needy, you would bring it to the temple. The temple was the hub of a community. And so what would happen is they would have the saying that the left hand brings the food or brings the money for the poor, and then the right hand is the needy that can come and get it. They would have certain times where you could bring your gifts, and then certain times where people could come and receive, so that the left hand never knew what the right hand was doing. So that the people that were bringing the gift could never see who was receiving it and never get any glory for themselves. It was charity with dignity. And so Jesus is saying the most manipulative thing that you can do to a person is to give something out of their need, give something to them, when they're in need, so that you can get some glory for yourself. That is the most dehumanizing thing that you can do to a person. It's charity with dignity. And so Jesus is using probably the most extreme example, but there are so many things that we could do with that. There's so many things that, even as being a musician on stage, a worship leader, a singer, if we're using this position to get glory for ourselves, we are actually dehumanizing everybody out here, because we're saying, I am using you to get some glory for myself. And so there are so many things that we could actually participate in where we're actually trying to get some affirmation for ourselves, trying to get some glory for ourselves, and it is actually dehumanizing people. And Jesus is saying the worst way you could possibly do this is to use someone's need to get affirmation and glory for yourself. And so this whole, right through the Sermon on the Mount, he's just picking up on this thing. You can't dehumanize people. People aren't things. Women aren't things. We can't use people for our own selfish pleasure. I mean, this was the whole issue with how Lucifer fell from heaven. He was clipping the ticket on the way through, getting glory for himself. So the question, so I think that's something that we really need to let settle in our hearts and really get a good handle on. I think one of the primary issues is that we think that these things only affect us. That our sin only hurts us, or that our pride only hurts us, or that comparison only hurts us, or that misguided sexual desire only hurts us. No. It dehumanizes people. It's actually using other people to get our needs met. And it's actually subjecting everyone else to our love deficit. So I have a hole in my heart, and the only way to fill that hole outside of the love of Jesus is to use others. That's what it really boils down to. I have to dehumanize others to get gratification for myself, or I have to treat them a certain way, use them, abuse them. And it doesn't matter what way you spin it. Ultimately, it comes down to the fact that all these things dehumanize others. And this is the common thread right through the Sermon on the Mount. How we treat others is how we treat God. And whatever you do to the least of these, Jesus said, you do to me. So I want to pick up on something, and then we'll close. But I read this during the week. The Barna Group did a study. They said 87% of millennials that they researched or did a study on who don't go to church see Christians as judgmental. It's an interesting statistic. Would anyone have an objection to that or agree? We put it out on Facebook this week, and no one said anything. But anyway. But I think it's a really challenging thought. That 87% of millennials who don't go to church see Christians as judgmental. I heard even in New Zealand this year, I think that Christians are the lowest of people that can be trusted of recent research. What is going on? Well, why are we known for these things? This is shocking, especially when Jesus clearly said, hey, it's not your job to judge the world. And we're going to talk about this in a second. But I have an interesting thought. Have you heard of what WWJD? Anyone heard of we used to have the bracelets. What would Jesus do? I mean, that was great. I thought it was really good. What would Jesus do? I think in our day and age we need to have another one that's WWJD SMLL. Should we make those bracelets? What would Jesus' social media look like? Hey, have you ever thought about if Jesus had Facebook, what would it look like? What would it look like? Would it be judgmental? Or would it be calling everybody out on their stuff? Or, what would it look like? Would it be encouraging? Would he even have it? I don't know. I personally think he probably wouldn't even have it. But I think it's a really good question, and a good question to ask ourselves with our social media. What would Jesus' social media look like? So what did Jesus say about judging others? In Matthew 7, so the next part of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says this: "Do not judge, or you too will be judged." I love the Message version puts it like this. So that critical spirit has a way of boomeranging. See, for in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. I think that should be a really sobering thought for us. In the same way you judge others, you will be judged. And with the measure you use it, it will be measured to you. Why do you look at the speck of sawdust in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? It's pretty funny, eh? I mean, just imagine Jesus, saying this at the time. I bet there was a lot of laughing at the time, because he probably was using some humor there. So how can you say to your brother, "Let me take the speck out of your eye," when all the time there is a plank in your own eye? You hypocrite! First take the plank out of your own eye, and then you'll be able to see clearly to remove the speck from your brother's eyes. So this is Jesus talking about judging one another. Well, what's he saying? Don't dehumanize others. You are not better than them. That's what he's getting at. Paul echoes similar thoughts in Romans 2 verse 1. You therefore have no excuse, you who pass judgment on someone else. For at whatever point you judge another, you are condemning yourself, because you who pass judgment do the same things. One version says if you engage in this type of behavior, you are being hypercritical and a hypocrite. So pretty strong language that Jesus is using. James, Jesus' brother, in James 4, he talks about this as well. And I've heard some people say that the book of James, that the large majority of the book of James is actually James reflecting on the Sermon on the Mount. And so if you want to read someone else's perspective on the Sermon on the Mount, read James. And so James is Jesus' brother, so someone that probably is pretty reliable. And in James 4, it says this: "Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. When you judge the law, you are not keeping it, but sitting in judgment on it. There is only one lawgiver and judge, the one who is able to save and destroy. But you, who are you to judge your neighbor?" So what happens is that sometimes we observe someone's behavior and we make a judgment. To make a judgment is to form an opinion. We form an opinion about someone based on their behavior, based on an external thing. And then we form an opinion about their motives and their intentions. And this is what Jesus is talking about. When we do that kind of stuff, we are actually dehumanizing them. And the point is this, is that it's really easy for us to judge others by their actions and then judge ourselves by our intentions. Because we know what's going on in our hearts. What we can't see with others is what's going on in their hearts. What's worse than that, and this is what James is getting at, is that sometimes we might go a step further and then think that Jesus is standing in agreement with our opinion about that person. It's me and Jesus versus this person or this people group. He doesn't like them. And he's with me. You know what I mean? Like, Jesus is always with me and my opinion. He's never with them. This is what James is getting at. It's one thing to judge someone. It's a whole other level to then say Jesus is on my side with my opinion of this person. I've discovered that Christians are the meanest when they think they're defending God. Or when they believe God defends their opinion. So what is James saying? He's saying this posture fills us with delusions about our own morality and character. And whether what they are doing is right or wrong is actually irrelevant. What James is saying is assuming that Jesus agrees with you is the problem. So back to Jesus. So in Jewish culture, whenever we talk about eyes, feet, or hands, what they would understand to be spoken about is this: is that with our eyes is how we see the world, with our hands is how we act in the world, and with our feet is how we walk in the world. And so remember last week we were talking about Jesus saying, hey, if your eye sins, pluck it out. If your hand sins, cut it off. But he's actually talking about how you see the world and how you act in the world. But Jesus is saying this. If let's look at his analogy here. You observe a speck with... How do you observe a speck in someone's eye? With your own eye, which has a massive plank sticking out of it. What's Jesus saying? You don't have a good perspective. You actually can't see clearly. Did you not notice there's this massive thing sticking out of your own eye? How can you expect to understand their story or actually even see the speck in their eye when you have this massive plank sticking out of your own? You need to understand that your vision is impaired. You don't have all of the story. You don't have all of the facts. So firstly, assume that your vision may be impaired. You don't know the whole story. I often have people come to me and say, hey, blah, 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 about blah, blah, blah. And my initial response is this, is what's their story? Oh, I don't know. Well, go and have a coffee with them. Find out their story. Find out why they may act like that. Hear about their upbringing. Find out their story. Don't make a judgment until you know their story. And so what Jesus is doing here is, when I read this during the week and started to think about it, it actually really started to humble me. Because I realized that Jesus is saying this, that I should always assume that my own issues are more serious than the person that I am observing. I should always just assume that I have far deeper faults. I should always just assume that there are way worse things going on in my heart than in theirs. And if I take that posture, then I will approach them with humility. See, the point is this. It seems to me that arrogance towards others and ignorance towards ourselves always seems to go hand in hand. We generally aren't very self-aware. And so as I've read this week, it has really humbled me. Thinking, how often have I acted out of arrogance towards others and been completely ignorant about my own life and the plank sticking out of my own eye? See, when we are filled with delusions about our own morality or character, we are not self-aware. We have just decided we are better than them. So the next question, I think that follows on from that, and maybe Josh can come and play the keys. We'll bring this into land. The next question I think that we should ask is, Michael, are you saying that we should never address anything with other people? No, that's not what Jesus is saying. It's not what Jesus is saying. And in fact, if you look at some of Paul's writings in his letter, especially to the Corinthians, he gives some guidance on around how do we actually address issues with one another. And in fact, he goes as far as saying this, that actually within the church, we should address things. But he uses this caveat. He says, but it is not our responsibility to judge people outside of the church. It's not. And I'm shocked, again, coming back to, what would Jesus' social media look like? I'm shocked at the amount of judgment I see spouted on Christians' Facebook pages towards unbelievers. Jesus clearly said, and Paul clearly said, it's not our job. I think if you want to, let me put it this way. Here's the New Testament. It's a smaller part of the Bible. Here's the New Testament. This is written to the church. Yeah, it's written to the church. This is written to us, not to them. If you want to see how the gospel is presented to unbelievers, read the book of Acts. But the rest of it is to address us and our hypocrisy often, and the ways that we are not living and participating in the kingdom. And so we can't take this and then bash them over the head with it, because it's not what it was for. It's for us. Let's have some humility and realize that this is about us. So it doesn't mean that we should never address issues with one another. However, if you take what Jesus is saying and truly apply it to your life, it postures you into a position that partners with the kingdom of heaven. Humility. See, if I see an issue with my wife, and I don't see any issues, she's amazing. And over the last few weeks, she's just proven to me again how amazing she is, and just how beautiful you are, and just how much you love Jesus, and it shines out. I love being married to you. But let's say I saw an issue with her. Reading this scripture, I would go, all right, there's something that I need to talk to Ellie about. I need to assume that what is going on in my heart is way worse. And if I assume and take that posture, then I go to her with just humility. Realizing that I am not better than her. My behavior is not better than her. That she's loved, that she's cherished, that she's worthy, that she is honored by God. And I have something that could call her up, not call her out, but assume that what's going on with me is way worse. That will change the way you approach people. It will leave you with a posture of humility. So James points out that there is only one person that has the right to make these judgments, Jesus. And when we look at his life and the way he lived and how he treated people with logs sticking out of their eyes, we see that he doesn't condemn them. And I'm so thankful that he doesn't condemn me. He loves me. He gave his life for me. And then he made a way for me to get out of my own self-imposed prison by the hopeless choices that I made. And that's Jesus. And he calls us to live and to act like him. But not through effort, but surrender, because when we surrender, we gain his life. It just becomes easier to live like him, because it's no longer us that lives, but it's him that lives in us, through us. When we stand this morning, in Matthew 13, Jesus used a parable to describe some of this, and in some versions it'll be the parable about the weeds, and some it'll be the parable of the wheat and the tares. And through the story, we can see that the weeds are growing up with the good plants. And at one point, the servants say to the master, "Do you want us to cut down the weeds?" We'll cut the weeds out. You know, it sounds like a good idea, doesn't it? Let us cut the weeds out. And the master says, no, just leave them. I'll sort them out at the end. What was Jesus saying with that? We're not good judges. You know, we'll get in there, let's cut the weeds out. Let's get rid of the tares from the wheat. There'll be a lot of collateral damage with that. A lot of collateral damage. Just leave it. Leave it to the one who is only able to truly judge. Leave it to Jesus. That's what he's saying. What's our role in this world? Our role is to love, to be carriers of the kingdom of heaven. I saw a post on Facebook a couple of weeks ago, a Christian, there's not enough judgment in the church. What the? Read the Bible. Get with Jesus. Let me pray. Father, we thank you for your goodness. Yeah, we thank you that goodness and mercy follow us all the days of our lives. We thank you that even when we run from you, you're chasing us down with goodness and mercy. We thank you that you're so graceful towards us, so merciful. I thank you that, Father, if it were up to me, I wouldn't put me on the stage. I thank you that you're so full of mercy and grace. And I thank you that it's not up to me. I think that it's not up to me to judge anyone. And I thank you that when it comes to the issues amongst brothers and sisters in Christ, that you've given us a clear way to navigate through dealing with those things. Do it with humility. Do it with honor. We thank you that your kingdom, although it feels opposite, is actually more natural than we could ever have imagined. We thank you that when we choose to participate and live in your kingdom, that we actually get to receive the benefits of it, the joy and the peace, the love, the righteousness that you give so freely. We thank you that we get to enjoy the benefits of those things when we choose to live in opposite world, when we choose to go left by turning right, that actually we receive the benefits of your kingdom, true life. And I thank you that we don't look over there or over there, that your kingdom is not up or down or left or right or in a place, but it's in the last place that we looked. It's in the inside of us. We thank you that because of your death and resurrection, that life eternal is now recreated on the inside of every person who puts their faith and trust in you. We thank you, Lord. Thank you, Jesus.